All right, are we live? Is this working? Hopefully, like always, the audio is working. Wait, I gotta remember to screen record this properly. So I can cut this into content, because everything is ruled by content all around us. Let's see. Hopefully you guys can hear me okay. Audio good? Tell me if there's an audio problem. All right, here. Let me set up a screen recording. I just freed up a huge amount of space on my hard drive so I can do like 2-hour 4K resolution screen recordings that end up being like 200 gigabytes or something. But I can use this to cut into content, which is great. All right, cool. Hi, everybody. So I've been working on this page right here. This page is pretty much done. It's really cool. There's probably a lot of like moire effect, unfortunately, because of like the stream compression and all that stuff. But there's a lot of really cool textural stuff going on. Again, this probably doesn't look very good on stream. There's this like super cool angle that's like really like almost, I don't know, it reminds me of something out of like a 70s like new Hollywood movie or something, like an early Scorsese or Jim Jarmusch panel or something, with the like low angle, all the geometric shapes, and then the characters off to the side. I don't know, just reminds me of like a American 70s new Hollywood movie. So the companion piece to this page is this one, so they go side by side. Here, I'll actually pull them up side by side so you can see what they look like in the spread. So this is actually a spread that goes together. Oh, well, actually the order is flopped. But it's going to take too long to fix that in Photoshop, so I won't bother. But together, they're a really cool sequence where she comes into this like cafeteria, huge, like monstrous space. There's some dialogue back and forth. It's pretty much an exposition scene. There's a lot of talking. And Lydia's done a really good job of kind of like varying the angles, so that even though it's just like sort of an exposition dump of conversation, the camera moves around a lot. Sort of we go close distance, far distance to try to kind of make it all just visually interesting. And then, so the first page, again, it's backwards, but the first page is over here on the right, and then over on the left it continues. Usually you put an establishing shot at the beginning of the scene, but it's just interesting that in the middle of their conversation we would cut like super wide to see the building, and I guess the lettering will continue over top of the building, which is kind of interesting. I gotta do a clap so I can sync up my audio and my video. Are you ready? Hopefully this doesn't blow out people's ears. Okay. Now I can sync my audio and my video. Then we get into this panel. So we're going to be coloring this panel that's over here on the left, where it's actually a pretty normal sequence where she, over here on the right, she like walks in, has a conversation, boring black and white reality, and then this panel over here in the middle that's uncolored is going to end up being the moment when like realities merge and the like color reality starts to leak into the black and white world. So this is actually going to end up being like a pretty colorful panel. And it's just a moment. It's like a moment where she starts to kind of like lose it. So she sees it, it scares her, and then she's sort of shaken down here in the bottom. She's sort of shaken, and she looks down at this like bottle where all these chili pepper characters were like running around, and they're gone. So it's just like this flash of another reality breaking through. So we're going to color the only color panel in this black and white sequence, which will be really fun. Wow, look how many people are here. This is great. Hi, everybody. It's fun that there's like that I recognize people's names from previous streams. So welcome back, everybody. Jeremiah, I think you've been in every single one of these, perhaps. Like maybe, I don't know how many times we've streamed, like 8, 7. Mayo Sotis, you've been in almost that many, right? If not all of them. Mary Loves Medical. Hi! You are great. Thank you. I think you're great. It's like disassociating. Who, me right now? Oh no, this panel. Yeah, this panel is like a moment of disassociation. Yeah. Also, oh nice. Oh, Zozer. I hope I'm saying your name right. Zozer. You came from the Discord. That's great. Normally people came to the Discord from the streams. You know what I mean? Like they came. It's the other way. So it's cool that you found us. All right, so we'll just get right into it. We'll start coloring. This page over here on the right, I normally when I color, or if you've watched our streams before, you know that I often have 2 or 3 pages up at the same time, because I'm checking to make sure that I'm matching the same like color system that I've already done on the page before, or another page in that same scene. This time, I actually don't think this page over here is helpful, because we're just doing we're sort of just doing a weird one-off where the color reality appears. And there's nothing that's going to help us reference that over here on the right. But I just remembered that the last time I was on stream, I colored this one. Yeah, this is a better reference for what we're doing. Sort of the next step in this. This is actually like earlier in the book. There's this doesn't happen concurrently, but we keep returning back to her as like her hallucinations get worse and worse. So we're essentially trying to match the vibe of what's over here on the right, but like it's much later. It's like this happens to her occasionally throughout the story. Like we'll go off, we'll show something, we'll come back and see her starting to lose it. We'll show something else, we'll come back and see her starting to lose it a little more. So each time the realities merge or she hallucinates, like whatever you want to believe is happening, it's worse and there's more color leaking through. So this one's going to be significantly more black and, colorful and destroying the black and white world than the one over here on the right. Hello, Infinite Fur, welcome. Speaking of people who have been here before. There's a lot more people on a Saturday night than I expected, to be honest. Saturday is, I guess, most people go out on Saturday. Some of us just, hang out and stream. Because we're cool. So I think the first thing I'm going to do is... This is like watching Bob Ross, where the first thing he does... I'm a big Bob Ross fan, as you know. And the first thing Bob Ross always does is he just like takes his big flat brush and he like swipes in with really broad strokes, like the background. It's kind of what we're doing here. Is just getting the color gradient in. Most of what Bob Ross does is actually working with... He sets up a gradient. That's like the very first thing he does. He works wet on wet oil, and he kind of like turns his whole canvas into a big gradient. So that's actually what I'm going to do. I'm going to do the digital version of that. So right now I'm using, for those of you who do know Photoshop, which I know not a ton of people in our audience use Photoshop, but for those who do know, I'm using the polygonal lasso tool, or the marquee tool. And I use it all the time when I'm coloring, and I get absolutely roasted in the comments for it, because people think I don't know how to use the pen tool, or I don't know that the pen tool is better. And I can tell you right now that the pen tool is more powerful. It's I know how to use all the curves and the alt click to start a new point, whatever. I know how to use the pen tool. I used the pen tool for years and years and years and years. For some reason, the more experienced you get in this program, the more you just stop caring about using the correct tool and you use the fastest tool. I use the lasso tools because it's a fraction of a second faster. With the pen tool, you have to make your selection and then like right click and say, make this a selection, make the shape that I drew a selection. And with the marquee tool or the polygonal lasso tool, it just is a selection, right? It just gives you the dotted lines right away. If you do the math and you think about how many times you have to make selections, over time, it starts to add up. And those little fractions of a second or 1 second that it takes to like right click and say select, just saying it adds up. So if, you know, for 18 years I used the pen tool, and then years 19 and 20 I was just like, wait a minute, I can just work how I want. Scintillating pen tool controversy. I know it's very, if you're in the world of Photoshop, what I just said is extremely controversial. Pen tool drama. Clip this and put it on r/livestream fail. I use the polygonal lasso instead of the pen tool. All right, so for sure the reality that's busting through, I want it to be yellow. Yellow and gray don't always play nice, so let's lay in. Let's see if this works. This might work. We'll go. I can't decide yet if I want there to be any black and white in this panel. I'm gonna guess maybe on the edges, like we want it to kind of turn back into black and white. There we go. We'll see if this works, if we like this. Oh, but you know what? I forgot to set up this panel that's her face. I didn't set up properly. I gotta put some white behind it so that it makes these halftones pop. Because right, it's interesting. I set it up with this really cool like halftone texture pattern that sort of like adds to the gradient. But it's actually not white, it's transparent. So when I put a color behind it, it destroys that like white halftone. So I got to go in. It's panel 3. I got to go in and just quickly put a white block under panel 3 so that it preserves that white halftone that I made. There we go. Okay. And now I can also check to make sure that, because panel 3, which is her face, is a lot of it overlaps with this panel that we're working on. So you just have to constantly check to make sure that you're getting enough contrast and that panel that's sitting on top like really pops away from the panel that it's sitting on top of. All right. Long Journey says, this is my first time watching you. This hand-drawn? Yeah, so the line art is all done with dip pen and India ink on Bristol board, and it's scanned and then sent to me, and I do all the shading and coloring. So if I zoom in, you can see like it's got that kind of gritty, all the line work has that like gritty texture that's really hard to get digitally. Like it's got that kind of authentic hand-done India ink on paper look, which is cool. All right, so we're gonna get the yellow gradient in. Ooh, yeah, this is gonna work. This is gonna be really cool. Yeah, Lydia. So Lydia's the line artist. I do the shading, coloring, and the lettering. So I like that. One of my favorite details is that this guy's head turns into a chili pepper. So let's do that. We'll color him up in a really cool, like, sort of. He's. I feel like his body's got to turn a color too. So let's get something in for him. In the story, he's Dutch. So that's why I wrote Dutch guy. It's not like some nickname or something. He actually is Dutch in the story. He's a reporter for a Dutch newspaper. Hello, Bello. Currently working on a comic. Would you recommend writing the story or drawing the characters first? You know, a lot of people actually have been asking that question. I just answered that question in the comments recently. Or maybe it was on our Discord. Shout out our Discord. Go join it. And I think, yeah, it was on our Discord. Somebody asked that question. So the answer is, did we talk about that today? So here's my answer to that question, which is you can work however you want. But if your characters have something about how they look that significantly impacts your story, you should draw them before you write anything, if that makes sense. So for example, the character like Wolverine, right? Like his character design is like extremely specific. Like he's like short. I think he's like 5'3" or 5'4" or something in the comics, and he's got literal gigantic claws that come out of his hands, and understanding how long his claws are and the fact that they retract, like you probably want to know that through character design, visual character design, so that when you write your story, you can think of cool things that can happen in the story, like, oh, he could like hold his hand up next to somebody's head, then like make his claws come out, and then I know how long they are, so I know they would go all the way through the guy's head. That's a weird example, but you know what I mean? Like you might not think to do, seeing how your character looks could affect the action. It could affect how other people perceive them and how you would write dialogue of the people talking to them, if that makes sense. So, but if it's just like a slice of life story about two normal people going on a road trip, and you want to like spend more time exploring kind of like the emotional connection between two people, and nothing fantastical happens, like you might want to write the script out and then design the characters. It's up to you. Yeah, it's I wish the one thing that, so I'm old. People think I'm a lot younger than I am, which is a compliment, but I'm old. I'm in my mid 30s. So Discord to me is like kind of a newer platform. Like it's not in my normal repertoire of social media. I mean, I've learned it recently to be able to have our Bad Ink Discord. But the one thing I can tell you that it's fun. It's been fun. Like I definitely feel like a Discord native now. But my feedback for Discord, and I guess this is sort of the point of it, but my feedback is all the threads just get buried. Like you can't. It's not like searchable. It's not like a good resource for what we do, which is like answer people's questions. Like I don't know. Maybe there's a way to do this, and I don't know. But I wish there was a way to make like an archive, so that people. Because we answer a lot of the same questions, which makes sense because a lot of the same parts of the comic process are like confusing for people. And I don't know. I kind of wish it wasn't just like one of those things where it got buried, because it's like not your fault you didn't see it, you know. Yeah. Well, no, mid 30s is old when you look at our demographic numbers, you know. Like most of our audience is like 20 years old. If you look at the pie charts of like how old people are who follow us, and I can also just tell from the kinds of questions people ask. I'm a college student. Like when I graduate, is it possible to make a living making comics? Like, you know, those kinds of questions. And the difference between 35 and 20 is like pretty significant. Like, in terms of life experience and like what kinds of social media platforms you use. So, and like slang, the words that you use when you speak, like it's intimidating, you know? Like, I always feel like I'm about to embarrass myself. Also, I don't know if you guys have seen the, the dynamic between Gen Z and millennials and how they call us chuggy and lame and neurotic and stuff, but I'm also really terrified of being called out by Gen Z for being like my millennial self. Yeah, I guess we should have a FAQ, like some kind of pinned stuff. Community mode? Oh, man. See, I don't know what that means. All right, I'm just trying to block in shapes right now. Nothing too spectacular. I've got a super limited palette. Oh, I think I lost my pepper colors because my Photoshop crashed. Let me pull that up. So all the I've got a super limited color palette. You can see it over here on the bottom left, which is good. It gives it like a really cohesive look. But all the colors, I guess the hard part is that it's hard to create contrast because since you're using so many of the same colors over and over, sometimes when things stack, like they are in this panel over here on the left, it's really hard because you have multiple elements that have to pop from each other, but they're all layered on top of each other, and you only have like 19 colors. So we're gonna see how this works, but these pepper characters are the exception because they have little green legs and like stems. Let me open up a guy that I've already colored so I can sample him. And this one. There he is. That's what these characters look like when they're completely finished. Here, it'll load in a sec. I'm very inspired by you and your team. That's really nice. Thank you. I think a lot of the tension between Gen Z and millennials is Gen Z seeing. I think millennials and Gen Z are fairly close in age, like comparatively, right? It's like 10, 15, 20 years. I think a lot of the tension is that Gen Z sees a lot of millennials kind of like giving up on their dreams or kind of like settling down and becoming quote unquote boring. I think that's really like, I don't know. I think it's hard to see people give up on their dreams or work jobs they hate and or give up on innovating or like stop trying to stay relevant. So I sort of get some of the tension there because it's like you want people to stay hungry and active and chasing dreams. You know what I mean? I see a lot of that. That seems to be the source of a lot of tension. Sort of, I think that's the psychology behind like making fun of millennial beige as like an aesthetic. A lot of millennials are starting families while Gen Z can't even pay rent. Man. Yeah, but what do you think happens when you start a family and then you realize you can't afford kids, It's just tough for everybody out there. I think Gen Z and millennials have a lot more in common than people think. But millennials probably do deserve to get made fun of. We're pretty cheesy a lot of the time. All right, so again, I'm just trying to set this frame up. We're trying to figure out how much is color and how much is black and white. I actually really like the balance right now where the glow is pretty big in the frame, but there's actually a decent amount of gray. Like I think you want to sort of feel like a lot of the black and white reality is still there, so that it adds to how weird it feels to have like a color reality breaking through. All right, so we'll block that in. Let's give her, she should be kind of like colorized by this kind of like invasion of color glow. So let's give her like a basic, we'll block her shape out. Let's see. Dang, there's 30 people watching right now. That's awesome. Oh, no, it just dropped to 25. People don't like when I call out how many people are watching, huh? All right. All right, so we're just going to block her in. A lot of I've talked about this before. For those of you who have been on the stream before, you know this. I do sometimes have trouble when I don't do my own color flatting. Actually, so Lydia, the artist, the artist who did all the line work, is doing some color flatting on some of the most recent pages that she's finished. God, I wish people could see some of the most recent pages. They're so cool, but they're incredibly dense. Like, they're so dense that some of them actually look like actual Where's Waldo pages. I mean, she spent hours and hours just on some of these single pages that are like towards the end of the comic when everything goes just absolutely wild. So she's actually doing some color flatting for me so that I actually can, see where the boundaries of objects are. Because when it gets that dense, sometimes you get confused about what you're actually even coloring. Like where someone starts and stops, or where somebody's hand is when it's overlapping somebody else's hand, or whatever. So she's doing a lot of the flatting for some of these later pages just for clarity. And it's going to be interesting because I have trouble when somebody else color flats for me, because what you'll see is that I'm not just color flatting to block out objects. I'm also trying to get a sense of like the color range that's going to be on the page, and like how those different colors affect your perception of the composition. So in the flatting stage, I'm not just picking random colors just to quickly block it out. I'm trying to get my color palette nailed down early so that I actually know how your eye is going to read this thing when it's done. So you'll see me kind of really adjust colors in this stage, when I think some people just color it like funfetti colors, entirely about making things visually clear, and then they'll go in and they'll start adjusting colors. But I need to know how the composition works. So it'll be interesting when I get those flats back from Lydia, like how my workflow is, Let's just, for now, I'll give her all the same color, and we can go back in. Fun fact, Where's Waldo in Australia is called Where's Wally. That makes sense. It feels like the more Australian. Where's Wally? That sounds like an Australian. That sounds Australian. Where's Wally? I know that in Australia they call McDonald's Maccas. Oh, you want some Maccas? Maccas. I know that they call, so in the UK they call McDonald's Mackies. And in Australia, they call it Maccas with an A. It's like Mackies versus Maccas. And that seems about right. You know what I mean? Like one sounds more British and one sounds more Australian. I love the colors used in Watchmen comics. Man, open up Watchmen and look at how similar this palette that I'm using over here on the left is to Watchmen. It's actually really similar. They're both based on like pretty fundamental colors. Like the reason Watchmen is so cool is that it's essentially like a deconstruction of the superhero genre, and because they jump back and forth between like old and new, like retro versus modern superheroes, The coolest thing about Watchmen that nobody ever talks about is that the color palette is very inspired by like early 1940s like bright saturated colors. So you get these heroes who are colored in this really classic, heroic, basic 1940s palette, but they're like doing despicable things, and it's like really powerful. Like the coloring in Watchmen is very, very intentional for in terms of conveying like emotional juxtaposition, and no one ever talks about that, or at least I don't see it being talked about as often as like, you know, the story or the actual line art or whatever. Yeah, my Australian accent. In terms of books that I think are colored well, anything by Matt Hollingsworth. He's like probably the best colorist working in the medium right now. Matt Hollingsworth. So you can look, if you look up Matt Hollingsworth, you'll see like just an array of really amazing palettes. But I'm trying to think of other comics that are colored really well or really interesting. I mean, pretty much just honestly, just look up Matt Hollingsworth. Like he's the greatest working right now. And everything he does is so weird and yet correct. Like he usually doesn't color things literally. But it all makes sense, if that makes sense. Like things aren't always exactly the color they should be, but he's got this really interesting sense of emotional shifts, and he'll actually, I think he calls it color scripting, where he'll actually like give scenes their own looks based on the emotions you're supposed to be feeling in that scene. It's really cool. Oh, it's Actual Dracula. I remember you because you have an actually really cool name. The Watchmen movie is bad. Yeah, I mean, I don't want to piss off any Scott Snyder fans, but I'm not a Scott Snyder fan personally. And I knew I wasn't a Scott Snyder fan when I saw the Watchmen movie. And I think a lot of people learned it later when they saw the Justice League stuff. But I'm also not going to judge anybody who likes the Watchmen movie. It's pretty epic in its own way. I just didn't think it translated a lot of the ideas from the comic that well. But I think Alan Moore specifically said he tries to make his stories completely unadaptable because he doesn't like comic book movies. So there you go. Scott Snyder. Did I say Scott Snyder? Isn't that who? I don't know. My brain is broken. Oh yeah. Okay. So that's a really cool comment. The movie, The Exorcism of Emily Rose, did the color scripting. Yeah, where like different scenes have different looks. Super well done. So I don't know how much I should reveal about myself. In my day job, because believe it or not, my day job is not making comics. I do sometimes work with professional color graders. Like we sit in a dark room and we actually grade film. Like you get the raws from a shoot and you give scenes different looks. And you do that. Like a lot of color grading in film is very emotional based, where when there's a flashback, you want to give it a certain emotional tone, like warm colors because it's about like warm memories. And then when you flash back to the present, you want to give it like a cooler vibe because the current world is not living up to those memories' expectations. So a lot of what I know about non-literal coloring or emotional coloring, I actually learned in color sessions with professional color graders working on footage, like film footage. So there you go. And then once you know that and you watch, I mean, every shot in Hollywood movies is like heavily manipulated in color grade. And it's one of the most interesting art forms in Hollywood. And there's a very small group of people who are professional color graders. So they touch a lot of movies. And if you actually know who colored what movie, you can start to see like their style across like movies in all different genres, which is really cool. But yeah, that's there's a lot of blogs if you want to like delve more into color theory and emotional coloring. Obviously comics are a cool place for that, but there's really cool blogs that do where they'll do like a screen grab of a movie every like minute, and then they'll assemble all those frames into like a timeline or like a big poster, so you can see how the color shifts throughout the film. You know what I mean? It'd almost be, every screen grab is so small in this giant block of like, you know, hundreds of screen grabs of one movie, that you can start to see how the colors, it's almost like they're pixels, and you can sort of see how the color shifts back and forth throughout the movie. It's really cool. Yeah, oh yeah. All I watch figure drawing, all I watch are horror movies. I actually tried to watch almost every single horror movie that came out last year. So I've seen Talk to Me, I've seen Barbarian. Barbarian was insane. A lot of my stuff is really inspired by horror movies, and I try to translate a lot of those concepts and those feelings to comic pages. I was actually talking about getting a Talk to Me tattoo. I'm totally going to get a Talk to Me tattoo. I'm going to get that hand, like a line drawing of that like plastered over white hand. I'm going to get like in a tattoo font and like a banner under it. I'm going to get just Talk to Me, like written. I want it to be like a riff on like the classic heart or something, like an old school Sailor Jerry tattoo. I loved Talk to Me. I thought it was like really creative. It was like a really cool twist on the classic like demon possession trope. Aiden Robbins on YouTube makes cool docs with great color grading and editing. Yeah, those kinds of like video essays. I feel like the best part of the internet, well, and also the worst part. But one of the best parts of the internet is like the incredibly high quality like video essays about cinema. You know, the good channels are good. The ones who are like have good takes and are talking more about the creative side, not about like how woke every movie is. I don't really like those kinds of video essays. But there's a whole school right now of like amazing 2-hour like all, you know, entirely, you know, fan driven video essays about color theory and like shot composition. It's like you can learn a lot about film just like watching people from their bedroom making these like documentaries, you know. Oh no way, you got to watch the newest Halloween? That's so cool. Where do you, well, you don't have to tell, I mean obviously you don't dox yourself, but do you live in, you must not, I'm trying to think of where Halloween is set in just like every town USA, right? Like that was always what made it so scary, is it was just like a normal suburb in America that was like invaded by this killer, right? So do you live in just like a normal suburb, right? Like you don't live in like LA or New York City, right? Like, because that's where you usually see things get filmed, is in a big city. uh, Divine Femme. I don't know. I think your name is Divine Femme. Again, sorry if I'm saying it wrong. I just started my own comic and I finished my first page. Thanks for the inspiration. You're welcome. Oh, Savannah. That makes sense. Savannah. Okay, so there's Georgia. Georgia, as a state, has done a ton of work to like draw film productions. I mean, if you watch to the end of most movies or TV shows now, there's like a Georgia Peach logo. And I think they have had a lot of success with that because Georgia has enough places that look like a lot of other places. It's like a very kind of like nebulous, in a good way, for film production. It's a very nebulous place because there's places that look like they could be anywhere in America, like in a suburb. But Savannah also has like a lot of history and cool buildings and architecture too. So it like makes sense there's a lot of film production there. Yeah. Well, I'm from New Mexico, and New Mexico saw what Georgia did and is trying to do the same thing. So they've had a ton of film productions there as well. New Mexico is like where they've filmed a ton of like Marvel movies, and they filmed like obviously Breaking Bad, but like Terminator movies and stuff. Anytime they need a desert, they film in my home state. Georgia's like Epcot for filmmakers. Kind of. Really, the Epcot. Okay, so the Epcot for filmmakers is actually Toronto, because anytime they film a city that's like Chicago or New York, and they have to save money and they can't actually do the film production in, Chicago or New York or whatever, they film it in Toronto. Toronto is the ultimate, like, and then Toronto has suburbs like really close to the city, but the city center is like a double for Chicago or New York or whatever. So they film a ton of stuff in Toronto. Like, and it's really funny because there's entire like film trivia sites dedicated to like when they accidentally reveal that it's Toronto in a movie supposedly set in America, where you can see the tower. It'll be like Jennifer Lopez in a rom-com, and it's like supposed to be New York City, and then you can see the tower behind her in the background. But yeah, like a lot of stuff is filmed in Toronto. Yeah, Oppenheimer was filmed in New Mexico. Or at least part of it was. I mean, even if New Mexico wasn't a hub for filmmaking the way it's like somehow turned into. It's so weird, by the way, that my home, when I was growing up, New Mexico was like not cool at all. There was nothing happening there. It was like so not a cool place to be, to the point where we all just like dreamed of leaving and going to California. But now New Mexico's like kind of cool. Like it's got film productions and a lot of buzz around it. But even if New Mexico hadn't turned into a hub of filming, I think that Christopher Nolan would have shot on location in New Mexico for Oppenheimer, just because that's actually where it was. You know what I mean? And he's such a stickler about like details. And getting things correct and shooting everything practically. You know what I mean? Yeah, they shoot a lot. They shoot a lot in Mexico City too. I've shot in Mexico City a bunch. I've gone on film productions there. It's much cheaper to film in Mexico, obviously, and workers will work longer hours and stuff like that for less pay. So they shift a lot of productions to Mexico City. Yeah. Mexico, yeah. I'm kind of glad Hollywood has sort of fallen out of love with setting things in California. That got really old. If you go back and watch 90s movies, like every single protagonist is like just some guy in LA, down on his luck. And it's like, okay, well, not everything has to take place here. It's just easy for you guys to film where you live. All right, so again, I'm just like blocking out stuff. I want, here, I'll show you. So the color reality looks like this over here on the right. And it's got a very weird look. It's like very much based in primary colors, blues, yeah, blue, yellow, kind of like orangey red. So whenever the color reality breaks into the black and white reality, I want it to reflect that. So I have a pretty limited palette. So I've got this tray over here on the left that's holding like a ketchup bottle and a syrup bottle or whatever. Normally you'd be like, okay, well, that tray in a restaurant or a diner is probably like aluminum. It's probably silver metal. But instead of using silver, I'm going to use the same light blue that I use for the water. Because again, I want this like reality, this color reality to feel really united. So we'll do kind of the same vibe on their trays over here. Yeah, that bottom left panel is pretty cool, right? Pretty overt, like Renaissance religious tribute going on. So the composition of this panel is like essentially a Renaissance painting from the Middle Ages. Like it's like she's essentially taken the role, and this is not a religious comic or anything, but it's just sort of like a tribute to classical art. She's sort of taken the role of like Mary in a Renaissance painting, where she's like centered in the frame, her shoulders squared off to camera, and she's even got her hand like up, sort of like a lot of the poses in Renaissance art. And then the concentric circles create a sense of like, I don't know, disorientation, but they also form like a tribute to like the halo, that like round halo look in Renaissance art. So for a moment, the protagonist is sort of framed like a holy figure, which is kind of interesting. Let's just flat these peppers in. This bottle is going to get tricky because I want it to be red and like really intense, and red is a really good like intense color to pop, but the peppers that are all like having a little like, I don't know, round circular dance around the base, they're also going to be red. So we can't make the bottle pure red because it'll just make these characters not pop out. So I'll just do like a gradient on it for now. Yeah, that actually looks cool. And then when I make the pepper red, it'll pop against it. By any chance, do you read old school Mad magazine artists, specifically Basil Wolverton? You know it, man. That like early era of EC Comics when they were borrowing, when Mad magazine was like borrowing artists from like Tales from the Crypt and Weird Science and stuff. It's the best. Jack Davis is like one of my, I think probably top 5 artists of all time. Jack Davis, who did a ton of really cool stuff for like Tales from the Crypt, like horror and science fiction stuff, but he also was like the king of caricatures, so he was in Mad a lot. But yeah, Basil Wolverton too. That's our era. That's like most of the stuff that we're influenced by is like classic EC Comics from the 50s, heavy metal from the late 70s, early 80s. That's like our jam. Wally Wood, of course. I'd put Wally Wood and Jack Davis from, specifically their work from that era, from the 50s. Like I'd put them in my top 5 artists ever of all time. Will Eisner would be in my top 5. As would Jack Kirby probably. So there's 4 already. I'd have to really think about who my 5th would be. Maybe Frank Miller, but only in the era when he was being inked by Klaus Janson. So like early 80s. And then he kind of, I don't know. I don't love modern Frank Miller art. Like a lot of people, I think he kind of, his style drifted, I guess, is a nice way of putting it. I don't want to bash Frank Miller because I think he's a genius in a lot of ways, but I don't agree with the messages in his recent books, and I don't love the art style. But that era when he was being inked by Klaus Janson, as a team, they might be like, I'd put them as a team in my number 5 slot, top 5 artists ever. Yeah, heavy metal. Welcome. Divine Femme. Tell me if I'm saying your name right. Divine Femme. Heavy metal is the best. There was no one sadder than me when they canceled the reboot of heavy metal. They were going to reboot Heavy Metal Magazine. Whatnot bought heavy metal, and they were going to reboot it with a new issue 1, and I pre-ordered every single cover variant. I pre-ordered like A through F or whatever, however many variants there were of the cover. I pre-ordered issue 1, every single cover, and they canceled it. I got a big old fat refund in my bank account, but I wanted the comics. And I talked to some industry professionals, and they were like equally bummed about them canceling the reboot of heavy metal, because they were like, dude, I saw a lot of the art, like a lot of the art for those first couple issues was like pretty much done. And it was by very talented, known people, and it's just canceled. Like, I don't know what happens to it. Like, I don't know if they still can put out their shorts that they made, but I have verbal confirmation that like very talented, known people had their stuff just basically like canceled when they like just shoved into a vault, as it were. You know what I mean? So I don't know when we get to open that vault, if ever, or if it just stays the thing of legend. You know what I mean? Yeah, they kills me, man. But we do essentially heavy metal. I mean, we do shorts, sci-fi shorts that are like anthology. We have like connections between our stories that are more like Easter eggs to make you understand that they do take place in the same universe. Like there's slight nods to previous issues, but for the most part, our stuff is anthology storytelling, short stories, sci-fi, fantasy, in that sort of heavy metal spirit. So I'm working on the next issue. So it's like a 40-page short story, self-contained short story, and this one is like as influenced by Savage sort of Conan the Barbarian as it is by sci-fi. So it's kind of like half. It's kind of all the parts of heavy metal, because heavy metal had like sword and sorcery in it too. Okay, so we got our little, this is cool. Remember, you got to always zoom out often, because I was a little lost in the sauce, right? Where you're like, you've got your nose up against the screen and you're like really zoomed in. But you got to remember to zoom out and remember what's actually important on the page and not get too focused on the detail of the wrong thing. Yeah, and horror. This one's like really horror inspired. The horror in this is inspired as maybe also by like the movie Creepshow. For anybody who's seen the movie Creepshow, I think it came out in like 1982. Like the vibe of the horror in that movie inspired the horror in this comic. Recom, how do you draw a motobike in a 3D space? Is this bait because you want me to open up issue 2 of our comic and show you all the motorbikes that Lydia drew? Because I will. All right, we'll here. Nobody look at my file organizational system because it's a nightmare. But I'll show you. If you want to see what it looks like to draw a bike in 3D space, there's one example. There's many examples in this comic. This is issue 2. Oh, that's cool. Okay, so here's a page from issue 2 where you can see Lydia's original inks, and then here it is colored, so you can see what the coloring does to change the vibe. But to answer your question from a technical standpoint, if you're drawing a bike, like a motorcycle or a motorbike in 3D space, most of it is understanding that it's essentially a rectangle This is an oversimplification, but it's a rectangle with 2 circles on either side. So as you rotate that object in 3D space, the circles are going to turn into ellipses. You can see it on this page where one angle is like more of a straight side view and one is more foreshortened, and you can see how the wheels foreshorten into ellipses, and the length of the bike foreshortens as you turn it, if that makes sense. So wide from the side is the rule. But there you go. Yeah, so if you like bikes, issue 2 of our comic is about a bike, like a biker gang. Like it's like a Mad Max. It's like Mad Max, but it's bikes instead of cars. Yeah, so there's another one. So it's that same vibe, that sort of like intense chase sequence vibe of like Road Warrior or Mad Max, but translated from the desert to the jungle and from cars to bikes, if that makes sense. I'm trying to find more bikes. Oh, yeah, there you go. So there's a sequence right here where there's like a lot of chasing through the canopy. So it's like more inspired by like trials riding, where you're like riding on really narrow things or going up like super crazy steep hills. There you go. Yeah, wide from the side, man. That's the rule. Show the double. Oh, yeah, here. There's a really cool spread here with a bunch of people, real-life people that we drew into the comic. I just have to find it. So, here it is. It's going to take a sec to open, but we did a Kickstarter for the last issue. We do a Kickstarter every time we do an issue, but for the Kickstarter for issue 2, you could get drawn into like if you paid at a certain tier, you could get drawn into the comic, and we put most of them on this page. So a lot of these people are like friends, partners, family, but this is like a ton of bikes all in one space. So you can actually see how they change angles and foreshortening. This one is got a really cool like exaggerated perspective. So you can see how Lydia drew the front tire at a certain angle, and then she like force perspective tilted the back tire. This one, so that it gives the sense of like it's not accurate, it's like twisted and warped, but it feels like it's moving really fast. That kind of like warping changes your perception about speed. So that's really cool. Cool. Oh, yeah. So our last Kickstarter, or the Kickstarter for this issue, was really close to Christmas. And I do wonder, part of me really wonders, like, how much better we did really well. Like, we raised a lot of money. But part of me does wonder, like, what we would have raised if it hadn't been close to Christmas. Like, the next time we do a Kickstarter, we should do it in the summer. And I bet we'll raise, like, double the amount. Because I know a lot of people, like, didn't have the budget, you know? All right. So we're just flatting. Just got to get these little guys in. And then we'll start doing some lighting effects once we like flat everybody in. What time is it? All right, so it's already on the East Coast. It's already 7:40. You can see how much these Chili Pepper characters are inspired by like retro cartoons, like Cuphead was like a big. There's like definitely the vibe of Cuphead in these characters. You know, down to the fact that their arms are just like arms and legs are just like spindly sticks that can get like wavy and wiggly in 1920s animation style. And since Steamboat Willie's in the public domain now, and Lydia snuck a Steamboat Willie into the background of one of the later pages when there's like a crazy Where's Waldo, or as you folks in the UK and Australia say, Where's Wally? But we have a spread like that, and like she snuck a Steamboat Willie into the background just because we can. Like nobody can sue us now for that, which is really cool. But it's amazing how much Steamboat Willie like matches the vibe of these characters, so it actually feels like really seamless when he's in the same scene as they are. Yeah, Cuphead wishes he was this spicy. When you work on comics, do you usually do it quiet or with music? Oh man, no, I'm always listening to music. I listen to so much music. I actually have a headphone collection. Like I have different headphones with different sound signatures for different types of music. So I've got like headphones that are better for like metal, or headphones that are better for like EDM, hip hop, like lo-fi music to study / relax to. Like I've got different like sound signature setups and headphone amplifiers and everything for like different genres of music. I listen to music all the time. I listen to headphones so much that I'm like definitely going to be deaf when I'm an old man. I also listen to a lot of books on tape. I switch back and forth between when I'm coloring, and it is a very mindless process. So when you're sitting here and you're just flatting things in, like you have to have something, I think, or you go crazy. And I listen to a lot of books on tape. I was listening to the Elric, Michael Moorcock Elric saga, and Ursula. I was listening to a lot of Ursula Le Guin and a lot of Ray Bradbury. So a lot of like sci-fi audiobooks. Yeah, no, it's too. Don't worry, Zozer. It's too late for me, man. I was such an idiot in my 20s. The amount of concerts and band practices that I went to, like we would just be the loud. We were so loud. We were the loudest band you've ever heard, and we would just play in a tiny room, and our ears would just like ring for days after those practices. Like so, my ears are already so screwed. And now I try to take care of them. Like I try to keep my headphone volume low, and I wear earplugs if I'm going to be at like a concert or a loud space, but the damage is done, man. Everybody take care of their ears. That's my advice to anyone young. It's so stupid what I did. Favorite author? It probably is Ray Bradbury, to be honest. I think Ray Bradbury, of those original like sort of like kings of science fiction, like Arthur C. Clarke, Asimov, Robert Heinlein, I think Ray Bradbury is by far my favorite of that original group, and since those guys are like some of my favorite authors ever, I think that would make Ray Bradbury my favorite author ever. Although I think Philip K. Dick is probably my favorite author, actually. It's either Ray Bradbury, it depends on what day you ask me. Ray Bradbury experimented with horror as well as sci-fi, which I think like somebody like Isaac Asimov didn't do as much. So that's why I like Ray Bradbury the most out of that original group of sci-fi pioneers. But Philip K. Dick kind of like, I don't know, if the original group of sci-fi guys like Arthur C. Clarke, Isaac Asimov, Ray Bradbury, if those guys were like, the music equivalent would be like, they're like Elvis, right? They're like the first wave of rock and roll. And then the Beatles were inspired by that, and like the Rolling Stones and all the 60s dudes like took what the original rock and roll guys were doing and like made it edgier, made it weirder, made it like more drugged out and acid trippy and crazy, like, and more experimental, and they brought in like more unusual influences. If that's the metaphor, then in this case, like Philip K. Dick is the Philip K. Dick is the Beatles and the Rolling Stones. You know what I mean? Like he took what that first wave of dudes did, and he like pushed it further and made it more experimental. And so his stuff holds up better. It's got more of a modern sentiment, in my opinion. And so that's why he might be my favorite. What type of Wacom do you use? I use, what is it called? An Intuos Pro, Wacom Intuos Pro. This is the pen. It's I guess you call it like the most normal Wacom. Like I'm not drawing on a fancy one that has a screen where you draw directly on the screen. I'm actually using the Wacom off to the side and just using my computer screen. So I think a lot of people use the iPad though. I mean, you don't have to use a Wacom. Like most people color comics or even just draw comics like on an iPad Pro with the Apple Pencil. By the time, I know the Apple Pro or the iPad Pro is expensive, but by the time you buy a desktop computer and a Wacom Intuos and you've got that all set up, you've probably spent more money than just buying an iPad Pro with the Apple Pencil. So I think if you don't have a Wacom and you're just learning, I would actually probably recommend to just get an iPad and an Apple Pencil because it'll teach you the basics of digital art and coloring with the control of being able to draw directly on the screen. XP Pen. I don't even know what that is. XP Artist Pen 22. Yeah, I mean, just use whatever works, you know? Everybody thinks you have to have like this super specific set of tools, and then you talk to like industry professionals and they're like, I don't know, I just use this thing. I don't even know what it's called. It's like, I got it from a thrift store. It's like, some of them, so it's like you think you have to have all this amazing stuff to be good. And then sometimes you talk to the best people on earth and they're like, dude, I just use this crappy thing. I've been meaning to upgrade for years. So if you can get a cheap tablet and it works for you, you know, especially if you're just starting out, because like you can always upgrade. But yeah, wow, you can see how this page is going to be. You can see how this page is going to be like really interesting because it's so impactful to have all black and white suddenly become color and then go back to black and white. So that'll be like really fun. Oh yeah, inheriting a PC. I want to get one that will connect. Well, the good news is that Wacom. So the other thing to know about buying a tablet like a Wacom is that they've been making Wacoms pretty much the same way for 20 years. Like I had a Wacom Intuos in 2003. You know what I mean? They've been making Wacom tablets with Bluetooth for 15 years. So the secret with Wacom is that you should buy them used. You just have to make sure that they're not completely beat up or like the surface isn't too scratched up or anything. But if you find somebody who took care of it, it'll be totally fine. And if you get a used one with Bluetooth, I think it should be, that would probably be the best way to buy a used one because you're not having to worry about like, is it USB-A? Is it USB-C? You just know that Bluetooth is going to work. So that's something. Look for like a used Wacom, like a one from like 10 years ago or more recent, used with Bluetooth, because then you can just fire it up and it'll work with any modern computer, because every computer runs Bluetooth. Maybe we do a gear tour as a short. Yeah, that should be like a. Maybe that should be like a Discord thing. Like, do we reveal the secrets of the gear tour to everyone, or is it like a perk of joining the Discord, you know? How long does it take Lydia to draw a page? I don't know. I feel like it really depends on... She's pretty fast, I mean, because she's doing her own penciling and inking. But varies greatly depending on the amount of detail on the page. I think it's so very. I don't know if there's a simple answer because I think like this page took her a much different amount of time than the ones that have like 400 characters in the background. I think it can be anything from like 5 to 10 to 15 to 20 hours. I don't know. Oh, good. I'm glad you like the Discord, my Sodas. I haven't been on there a lot in the last few days, maybe the last week, because I've been so busy at work, like really busy at work, like staying up, pulling all-nighters for work. So I haven't been on the Discord in a while, but it seems like it's thriving. There's like 400 people in there. It's like holding steady at like 400 members. Yeah, Mary's in there all the time. Mary knows better what's going on there than I do. Apparently there's a lot of people in there like actually helping each other with like questions and techniques and writing and stuff, which is like amazing. Like that's what I wanted it to be, is like a resource for people, All right, so I message you about Discord community mode. Well, we have a mod who knows what's going on. He's like super experienced with Discord, so I'll just ask him. I'm glad you told me about community mode, but since we have somebody helping us who's like the full-time mod of the server, I'll just message him and I'll say, hey, like, can we make sure that community mode is on? And he'll know. So you don't have to worry about sending a message. Just the fact that you told us is like super helpful. Yeah, I'm really happy with the Discord. Oh, it allows forums. Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, I'll ask him about that because I would like that. That's how my brain works. I like go back and look at stuff, or like I'm looking at Reddit threads a lot to get answers to questions. So all right, so wait, I gotta make sure the music isn't playing. All right, cool. Although I don't know why I would be worried about the music playing, because the only music that I play is music I've made that doesn't get copyright strikes. So even if music was playing, it wouldn't actually be a problem. Like the stream wouldn't shut down. What's your stance on the rule of cool? I don't know if I know what that is. Should I know what that is? Wait, tell me what the rule of cool is. I'll tell you what I think about it. I maybe it's embarrassing that I don't know what it is, but I don't know that I've heard of it. Is that like a cool hip thing that all the kids are saying? Yeah, the search feature on Discord does seem really bad, to be honest. What band were you in? You have always looked familiar. I 1,000% guarantee you that my band was not popular enough for you to know me from the band. But if you want to know what band I was in a band called Mohicans that is on streaming platforms. It's on Spotify. And I did the cover art for this album right here. So if you want to listen to some Bay Area hardcore circa 2008, It says 2004 on streaming platforms. I think that's wrong. I think we released this in 2014 or 2013. But if you want to hear some Bay Area hardcore from an era when a lot of Bay Area or like West Coast bands were like mixing like heavy, like sort of death metal style amp tone with like hardcore song structure, you can listen to this EP. And I did the cover art, so that's fun. The cover art is a Adobe Illustrator drawing that I did. Okay, the rule of cool. The rule of cool is doing something just because it feels cool, even if it doesn't do much in regards of sending a message. Well, my initial reaction is that sounds really stupid, and we shouldn't do things just to feel cool. Like everything we do should have purpose and substance. So maybe give me an example though, because I don't want to speak out of turn. In fact, I think that most of the problem with comics today is that a lot of people do things just because it is cool, seems cool, looks cool, and they don't actually think about like having any substance to their work. You miss old school hardcore? Yeah, you should definitely check this album out. This was a fun band to be in, man. It was like the some of the members of the band were really into like old school hardcore, like SS Decontrol and like Youth of Today and like Madball. And then some members of the band were really into like death metal, and some members of the band were really like into doom metal, like Sleep and Electric Wizard. So like we used amps that you normally use in a doom metal band. Like we used Sun amps, like a lot of like vintage 1970s Sun amps that were like the loudest amps ever made, but we're playing hardcore and we're tuned low, like a really low, like drop. I think we tuned in drop G. For those who know music, that's absurd. Like if you know guitar at all, and drop G is like almost impossible to tune to. You have to like actually physically modify your guitars. Like you have to, like on my bass, I actually had to use a file and actually like file open the string slots because I had to fit such large strings on it to be able to tune that low. So there you go. When you listen to our music, it's just like absurdly heavy. It's almost like a joke how heavy and down-tuned it sounds. Photoshop has an AI art option, which is said to be ethically sourced. What's your overall view of AI art? Feel free not to answer. I don't know, man. I feel like I don't love to talk about AI on social because it is controversial and you just end up creating debate in the comments, and the noise of that debate is not really that productive, and people on both sides start yelling at each other, and I don't know. It just feels like by talking about AI, you facilitate yelling, and I don't know. I'll just say that I'm pro-human, as in I want creative humans to be paid for their work and continue to be employed. And if humans can use AI tools and keep their jobs, and other humans that the AI is trained on can be compensated for that training, then I have no problem with it. But I don't know that we live in a world where all of that can happen. I guess that's my answer. And I don't know if I like that, but I think it's a little silly to completely refuse to accept AI or pretend that it doesn't exist, because regardless of how you feel about it, I think it's being integrated into everything we do already. And even if you don't use Midjourney, art programs like Adobe are starting to integrate it, and you may end up using AI without even realizing you're using it. You know what I mean? Like if they come out with like a more advanced version of like content aware fill or the magic wand tool or something, it might be AI based. You know what I mean? So I don't know. I just want people to be paid. That's all. And I want humans to have jobs. I want people to be fairly compensated for the work that they do. I really liked that AI Seinfeld. That like never-ending Seinfeld episode that somebody made on Twitch. That was cool. That felt like a real like use of AI as art, you know what I mean? Loud noises. Yeah, see, they're Jinja snaps. If you know guitar, you know that playing in drop G is absurd. And when you've got, like a 300-watt tube amp and you're playing in drop G and you've got the gain all the way up and it's just distorting, like you could literally just play open strings and it sounds like you're playing like the heaviest song you've ever heard. It's fantastic. One thing so here's what I'll say about AI is regardless of what happens with AI, this whole stream has been like using music as a metaphor for art, which is interesting. You can see why my two main interests are music and art. So for the people, so this is Neo Wolf. This is specifically for the people who are worried, who are really scared, because I think a lot of people are very rightfully terrified of AI and how it's going to like change jobs or eliminate jobs. And especially if you're like a student, you're like, well, why am I even studying art if I'm not going to like ever be able to do art, right? Like that's the concern. So, here's what I'll say about AI is regardless of what happens in terms of what jobs it takes, whatever, the metaphor that I do think everybody should keep in mind is that streaming is the craziest, most like simple, elaborate, quickest way to consume music, right? Like in this metaphor, AI is sort of like streaming. You can get anything that you want. You just type it in and you just get it. You pull it up, it starts happening. Like that's what streaming is for music, right? So if you told somebody 20 years ago that streaming would one day come out, they'd be like, oh my God, like it's gonna, no one is ever gonna want to buy a record ever again. But what happened was how impersonal streaming is, how easy it is, has actually made it more appealing to listen to a record. Vinyl sales are not what they were in the 1970s, but it's the fact that this is so easy to access and so impersonal has actually made people like me collect vinyl, because we actually want to go back in time and have a human experience and like take out the record and put it on and be forced to like not have an ADHD moment and be forced to listen to a whole side of an album in order and have like a more intimate experience where you're like touching it and putting the needle on it and looking at the album art. So like streaming did not kill vinyl, it actually reinvigorated an interest in a more human version of music. But it did kind of kill CDs. So if you think about AI, part of me wonders if what's going to happen is everybody's going to be able to make anything instantly, but sitting here on stream with me in real time, connecting with a human, having a more like personalized experience with the art, like watching the art happen in real time, is sort of like the slow version of art. It's sort of like the stripped down vinyl experience. So there won't be as many jobs, but there will be niche jobs and like sort of like a vibe people are chasing. Like maybe people will want to go see art done live, for example. So I'm just reminding everyone that like streaming did not eliminate certain parts of the music industry. It actually reinvigorated interest in certain parts. So I would remind that, especially to students who are in their beginning of their career. But it means you're going to have to be smart about how and what you do with your career. Like, I don't think you can go work, if you're in art school, I don't think you should expect to go be a background artist at a video game company anymore. Because a lot of that is just going to be taken over by generating backgrounds with AI. But you might want to look at being like a painter who can teach painting to other people in live classes. You know what I mean? Like, I would think about where the human connection intersects with art, and then think about careers around that. That's my personal advice and take. People don't love art just because of art. They have favorite artists, and they like to go to comic conventions and talk to people, for example, and get signatures. Like, I don't think that's going away. So, just saying, like, maybe it's time for people to like force themselves to actually go backwards in response to this forward progress, if that makes sense. Oh. Bye, Mary. Enjoy the skills challenge. Tell me when the 3-point thing starts. Will you and Lydia ever go to an LA Comic-Con? Man, I really want to. I gotta be honest though, that's about as far away from where we live as possible. I would love to go to an LA Comic-Con, but we'd have to fly and ship, humble brag, but we sell a lot at cons now. So in order to have enough stuff to not completely sell out in the first few hours, like we'd actually have to ship and fly like extra suitcases and extra boxes of like very heavy comic boxes and stuff. So getting to LA would be really hard. Because it's not just us getting there, it's like getting all of our inventory there. So I'm not sure if that's in the cards for us soon. We're trying to just do more stuff in the tri-state, like New Jersey, Connecticut, New York, and then maybe places like, I don't know, Rhode Island or whatever. Yeah. I think thank you. I think that I think with AI, I've always said this, with every trend creates a new market, a new opportunity to make money and build a brand by being opposed to that trend. Even if your audience is very small, if you're smart, you can make money standing against anything. You can people want to rally behind things with a belief system attached to it. And your belief system could be, we do everything by hand. And that's enough of a statement in an AI world that might attract an audience to you that would keep you going regardless of what else is happening in the industry. It's sort of like a punk rock mentality. Like, I don't care where music goes, how polished it gets, we're always just going to be like people plugged into amps making noise. Like, we can always find an audience of people who want that kind of experience, regardless of what kind of digital manipulation you can do in music production. You know what I mean? Oh, bye, Divine Femme. Thank you. Thank you for coming. Come down to Australia. Oh man, that is quite literally the farthest that we can go. All right, I've been avoiding it, but I have to do the fire now. I really don't want to. This is my least favorite part of coloring this comic, is having to paint in these fire trails. You can see, wait, where is it? Over here on the right. See all this fire? This took me so long to do. So long. Because the only way to do it is to go in there and like just do it all by hand. Like, you just have to like use the brush tool and just do this over and over and over. Oh, all right, we're gonna do it. Yeah, we have to do it. Okay. Oh, here's my dog. Come here. Come on. Come here. Come on up. Oh, you don't want to be on camera? Come on. You don't want to come up and everybody to see you? Come here. My dog is just staring at me. Come on. Come on. No, she doesn't want to be on camera. All right, fine. Go over there and bug somebody. We might have to change the color of the glow in the background because the fire is going to blend with it. Let's actually, okay, let's see. We've flatted enough in this panel where we can actually start to see like what it feels like to start to flip through different colors on things, which is fun. So the first things first, we'll see if what it looks like to change the color of the gradient in the background. So there's with it changes the vibe like immensely actually. So there's if the glow in the background behind him was white, it would completely change the vibe of the scene. But if we change it to orange, oh, I kind of like the orange glow actually. What about this one? That's pretty cool too. I wonder if we should be bold enough to go that far. Another option would be to like make it a 50% opaque overlay so it gets a little bit more tangerine colored. That's actually really nice. So that's what it was before. We were working with like a yellow glow, but the problem with the yellow glow is that it doesn't really make yellow things on top of it pop. Like I really want to have yellow elements on the table be like popping forward. So I got to change the background glow. So if I go to, yeah, I like that a lot actually. That changes the vibe immensely and it makes her pop a lot more. Like, okay, so look at her. So before she was almost like blending in with the glow behind her because she's yellow, but if you change the glow to orange, it changes it so that she's defined from the background much better. I like that a lot actually. I'm using you as background noise as I'm building in Minecraft. Has anybody noticed that Minecraft is like the B-roll of the internet? Like when you do a film production, B-roll is just like the random footage you use when you don't have anything else and you just need to like stick a shot in. I feel like Minecraft like has become the B-roll of the internet. Like if somebody's just like telling a story or like reading funny tweets or something, like they just put Minecraft footage behind the audio. I feel like half of my TikTok feed is like people reading meme threads or Reddit threads or something with like Minecraft footage just playing. It's like like Minecraft is like interesting enough to hold your attention if you're like trying to make content for people and that you don't want them to skip. It's like Minecraft is like visually interesting enough and yet not distracting so that you can put any audio over top of it. It's super interesting. Yeah, the trays are blue because they're affected by the hot sauce guy. I kind of want it to feel like this bottle here is like the nexus point and everything that the light and it's like the bottle is like casting light outward in like a radial glow, and I want it to feel like everything that light touches is turned to color. It's like a color bomb that like goes off and everything that the light touches turns to color. But what I am going to do eventually is, I don't know if we'll have time to do it on this stream. What I am going to do is like see where the glow drops off on the edges. I'm going to actually go in and fade colors back to black and white. I'll do it on this tray real quick right here. So just to demonstrate this, I'll make this even more blue. for the purposes of demonstration, I'll make this even more blue. Okay, so let's say, so in Photoshop you can do something where you paint white over top. Check this out. So I'll just do a white airbrush like this. Oh, not that, white. And I'm going to try to match the edge of the glow. So it's going to be like here. And then you set it to saturation, like that. And it fades back to black and white where the soft edge of that white airbrush was. So I'm turning it, here, let me zoom in. I'm turning it on and off, but you can see how like, I want it to feel like you can see how the blue fades back to gray and the orange on this bottle fades back to gray. That's the vibe I want. So that it feels like this glow is like truly a source of light that changes your perception of objects. So that's the vibe I'm going for. That'll be like the final step, is to like go in, and I'm going to do it on her too, I think. Like I kind of want her back to go back to gray because it's like the light is only hitting her in the front. All right, let's get the fire in. So the way Lydia draws fire is actually really cool, but it's also kind of hard to color sometimes because you don't know exactly, like she does a really good job of not making fire look too cartoony. Like it's not like a perfectly defined flame, but because it's not a perfectly defined flame, some of your job as a colorist is to define those edges. And so you sort of have to make educated guesses about like where it starts and stops, where the gaps are in it. That's why it's so time consuming to color, is that you have to go in here with the brush tool and get really smart about what you're filling in. I love how in Photoshop everything can change by clicking one setting option in the mountain of settings when you right click. Yeah. If you actually know what you're doing, Photoshop is definitely the most powerful graphic art program on the planet. You don't need most of what it can. You don't need like 90% of what it can do if you're just like making comics. But I do a lot of like photo work too, and like I used to do retouching. So I actually know a decent amount of Photoshop outside of just like using the airbrush tool and the paint bucket tool. And Photoshop is insanely powerful. And if you know what you're doing, you can like do scary things with it, like crazy, amazing photorealistic things with it. Did you ever add any magenta-ish stuff? Yeah, so not in this scene, but there's actually a character who has like an almost, it's down here. I don't know if you can see it in the palette. There's a color right here called Dream Magenta. This one right here. So I use that sometimes. Actually, yeah, maybe we'll use it. It actually would be really helpful on this page, right? Because there's like, I probably need a variation of like, besides pure red, to give me some more options in layering. But there's a character who uses that magenta color like pretty heavily on their character design. So you don't see it as much here on this page, but there are pages where that magenta is like much more prominent. So like, okay, so right here is a good example of the kinds of choices that you sometimes have to make as a comic colorist. So I'm looking at flames that are I guess the art term for it is that they're suggested. They're not fully defined, right? So these lines right here, they suggest flames. So as I'm painting them in, I'm trying to kind of like make an educated guess about where they might actually stop. So here, I'm just going to do that. Just kind of like make a little shape and just say, okay, I've decided that's where I think the flame stops, because Lydia hasn't actually drawn the exact defined shape of the top of that like pointed flame shape. So a lot of what you, in addition to knowing color theory and like paying attention to contrast and things like that, a lot of what you do as a comic colorist sometimes is actually like having to define the boundaries of things that the artist may not have, because their style might not be, to draw cartoony outlines around everything. So you have to make a decision about, okay, am I going to honor that by having it kind of, having the coloring also not be very defined and sort of like drop off and blur out as well, so that I honor that lack of definition? Or am I going to make a stylistic call to define some edges that they didn't, if that makes sense? And that's where it gets a little tricky, because you want to really honor what the artist, what their intention was, but you also need to make sure that you put your own stamp of style on it, and you need to make sure that there's clarity and contrast between layered objects in the panel. So it's tricky. It's a tricky art form. You have to have a lot of trust. You have to be entrusted to make calls. And luckily, Lydia and I have worked together long enough that we do, have that kind of trust. You know what I mean? I still feel an immense amount of pressure to, I guess, quote unquote, get it right, because I really respect her art and I don't want to mess it up or make it look worse. So, I put a lot of pressure on myself to get it right. You know what I mean? So what I'm going to do is, after I kind of define the flames, I'm going to start going in with halftone brushes and start to kind of like add the sense that there's embers, and like you can see how I did it here on the flames over here on the right. Like add embers and dimension and darker and lighter shades, so it starts to feel a little bit more dimensional. I did it here too, where there's like, there's a halftone layer over top. There's a couple halftone layers over top. So when I first drew the fire, it looked a little too sharp and defined. So I just started to layer halftones of the same color over top. And that really helped create a sense of like, it still has sort of like a fun cartoony vibe, but those halftones like soften those defined edges, and it makes it feel a little bit less Saturday morning cartoon, while still being very clearly inspired by like classic flat comic art, which is cool. So the workflow for this is kind of weird. This is definitely like a trust the process moment, where you're like, it doesn't look super good until it's all done. All of a sudden it'll like come together at the last minute, and you have to kind of trust that is going to happen. Yeah. And honestly, the only way to do this is just to sit here and block it out by hand. Because if you try to cheat, it just won't work. It'll look really amateurish. So you have to kind of like use your eye and just go in and do it all. I do it manually. Well, yeah, I mean, I'm doing it manually too, right? Like, I'm just kind of like sitting here by hand, like blocking out the shapes. But if you're talking about doing, are you talking about doing halftones manually, where you actually sit there and you do the dots? Because you don't have to do that. That you can get like brushes for that'll like paint in the halftones. Oh, there's fire coming out of his hands too. The little like dancing pepper. All right, we'll do that too. But yeah, I think the most successful part of this panel so far is when we changed the background from that like lemon yellow to the more like orangey tangerine color, because all of a sudden it made everything pop. That yellow just was not doing us favors in terms of like contrast in the background. Yeah, manual halftone. Yeah, you gotta get some halftone brushes so you don't have to paint in thousands of dots by hand. Even though that's kind of, I mean, I kind of applaud the dedication, but halftone brushes are amazing now. The coolest part about modern halftone brushes is they have like seamless pattern repetition, so you can just like use them endlessly and the dots always line up no matter how far or wide or tall of a space you're painting the dots into. That's the best part. Cool, man. So, okay, so far the best parts of this panel are... Oh, wait, let me turn on the... look over here on the left on the bottles. I'll turn back on the desaturation gradient. Fades it back to gray. It's so sick, man. I love that trick. So that's a white airbrush set to saturation mode on the layer blending. In fact, we can do it to give you a sense of the vibe that I'm going for. I'll do it more places too. So I'm gonna, now that this layer is set to, here, I'll call this layer black and white. Flip, not FIP. Yeah, the Craftone halftone brushes are the best. Craftone makes the best halftone brushes. Oh yeah, and you have to go in. So when you pick a halftone brush, I'll use like grainy dot, right? So if I use a halftone brush now, the dots are going to be a certain size. Does that even read on stream, or does the compression just make those dots look like garbage? So when you use a halftone brush, the dots are a certain size. And most people think that halftone brushes are really limited because of that. They think like you get dots in a certain size, but in a lot of programs you can go in here and change the scale. So if I set the scale to like 20% instead of 50, like now I'll get much smaller dots. Once you know that you can change the scale of the dots, the size of the dots, like now all of a sudden these brushes are like super versatile. You can use them. It's like you have hundreds of brushes in one, because the difference between, it's the same brush, but halftones are so affected by dot size that denser dots look completely different than big, like here. So I'll set the scale to like 80, and it like might as well be a different brush. You know what I mean? Like that's the exact same brush. I just changed the dot scale size. Once you know that you can do that, it's like you unlock like a whole other skill. So I don't know how to do it in other programs, but they definitely have this option in other programs. You know, it's the same thing. Oh yeah, we were turning things black and white. Okay, so now that I have a layer set to black and white flip, so it's white with a it's white with a saturation change as a layer effect. Now whenever I paint white on the page, it'll flip it to black and white, which is like really cool. Wherever I paint, yeah, here you go. Now you can see it. Wherever I paint with this brush, because it's sitting on top with a layer effect, it flips it back to black and white. So it's like a super powerful tool to be able to like manipulate your perception of the page. So now I can go in on this black and white flip layer and paint black and white back in. So I can do it like on the edge of her here. So she's like truly affected by the light coming off of this. And it's turning her color where the light is touching her, but her back where she's in shadow is still in the quote-unquote black and white world. I can do that on any object too, so I can do it on the plates on her tray, the cup and saucer. It's really cool. It's subtle, but it really like affects your perception of it, you know? So I'll turn that layer on and off. You can see how it changes. So just look at the like kind of like the edges of the frame, and you can see that like that black and white flip like really does make it feel like there's this one weird color glow that's like lighting things up in color. It's cool, man. All right, sorry. The NBA dunk contest and All-Star game is on tonight, and I just wanted to know when it started. No, I know. I was muted because I was asking about basketball stuff. I meant to mute. I've got a kill button on my mic. I was asking about when I should go in the other room and watch the NBA, the All-Star game. It's because I muted when I was talking. All right, so I was trying to decide like what color his eyes are. I think I like to treat one of the little like nuances of my color style is I like to treat eyes and eyeballs like reflected, like mirrors, like super reflective surfaces. Eyes don't really reflect as much as as a colorist. Eyes don't reflect as much as I make them when I'm coloring, but it adds like a really cool sense that lights are really bright and like bouncing off of surfaces. And it creates a sense of like the characters being enthralled by what they're looking at. So I do that a lot. I usually take the light source that somebody's looking at and I like draw it pretty heavily, the same color, into their eyeballs. Yeah, so I almost treat my coloring like everybody has mirrored contacts in. So like, for example, for her, I'll probably put her entire eyes orange like this. It looks insane, but it really creates the sense that she's like super, just can't take her eyes off of it. Like it's filling up her soul, you know? The light that she's looking at is like really affecting her. So like something like that is pretty amazing. It makes her look like crazed, wild-eyed, which is like kind of the vibe I'm going for. I mean, you can see how much that changes the intention of the page. Like it suddenly goes from her looking at something being afraid to her like being like hypnotized by it. Like look at how when I just flip the eye layer on and off, it gives you that sense of like mind control almost. It's like really crazy. I want an even stronger glow on her. So I'm gonna take a soft brush and just paint in even more of a glow. Like something like that. Although, I think that's too yellow. Maybe we'll do a little bit more orange on the glow. It might even work to put a white glow on her, on the edges of her. Because obviously when light is at its brightest, it tends to go back to pure white, like the white hot fire of a flame. So when you use pure white next to a color, let's see how, you'll see what I mean. It tends to make stuff look like really intense light. So this is just pure white. If I put rim lighting on her here, like down her nose, like all the edges that would catch light. I mean, I'm not being super accurate, but it might really help create a sense of like extremely bright light shining on her. Like that thing in the center is like hitting her really intensely, you know? It definitely makes it feel like a really intense light is on her. I can't believe how much of a difference color can make. I know, right? I cannot either. Sometimes in the same way that I color people's eyes with the color of the light that they're looking at, sometimes I'll actually do that on teeth. For the same reason, like teeth are pretty reflective, actually. They're kind of like a shiny surface. So sometimes if someone's being hit by a color of light, you can reflect it in both their eyeballs and their teeth. And it can actually make it seem like they're being bathed in a really colorful light. So actually, we could try it, see what it looks like. I mean, it might not work to make her teeth orange. And she's got sort of this like septum piercing, so we could make, that's metal, right? So we could make that. It sort of works. It's a little much. I don't know if I like her teeth that yellow, or I mean that orange. I think knocking them back with yellow could help. Yeah, that's not bad. That looks more correct. That's kind of a nice effect. It really is crazy, though, how much of it did. Like, if you, like, I'll turn off all the coloring. So that's what it was when we started today. It was just like a black and white panel, right? Look at how crazy different it looks when you turn on all the color layers. I mean, obviously it's the same intent, like Lydia as the original artist. Like, this is the same intent exists. I haven't touched her line art, and I've defined all the shapes that she's drawn in. Like, I haven't drawn new objects, right? But the difference is an emotional one. Like, it feels like we went from sort of a scene where she's obviously scared to a scene where she's like maybe like mesmerized, and the fear gets dialed up a little bit. Like, it feels like actual terror. It's pretty cool. All right, bye Zozer. Thanks for being here. Yeah, thanks for so many good questions. Yeah, so when she's the barbarian style, it's this color palette. But she looks here. I'll show you a page where she's the barbarian. It's the same exact color palette, but it's she's a much more confident character. She's dressed up like a barbarian. This is the same character in the dream world. So she's got the horned helmet and the sword and the boots and everything. She's like a Conan the Barbarian character. She's still got her like piercing, her like nose piercing. But these oranges and yellows are actually the same ones that I'm using on this other page. It's just in a very different context. So yeah, that's the difference. Black and white world, color bleeding into the black and white world, full color world. It's a pretty cool collection of stuff. I don't know. I don't know if I'll keep this white lighting. It definitely helps make it feel really bright, but it might be too much. I don't know. I'll finish it out. I'll get it accurate. I'll hit all the edges with it that would be affected by the lighting, so I can like make a full judgment. Like it would be hitting the tips of her fingers and I mean, yeah, my light source I'm not like super accurate to the light source. I should probably be a little bit more careful, but I'm just trying to get it in quickly so I can make a judgment about whether I want to keep it or not, you know? But I'm just going to take every edge on this side and give it a little bit of like white. Just so I can make a judgment on whether I like this or not, you know? I kind of like it. I don't know. This is one of those things where I probably like it now, and then I'm going to work on this panel more off stream, and then I'll like probably by the time I get everything else in, I'll have changed my mind, but it's sort of interesting. So right here, I'm going to invent a new line because Lydia didn't draw it, but sometimes this character has a line, like her cheek line. You can see it in this panel right here. She's got like kind of like a cheek line from her nose that, you know, goes around her mouth. And Lydia didn't draw it in, but I feel like if I'm putting in this kind of like really intense white lighting, that lighting is going to catch every line. So you probably would see that, right? We don't want to go crazy. It's something like that. It's kind of nice. Yeah, it's pretty intense, but it works. Yeah, it's cool. And then we can do like the same kind of rim lighting on these bottles, right? So first we'll do a gradient, knocking them back into darkness a little bit. Because when you have really intense lighting, you also need really heavy shadows. So I haven't finished her because she needs a whole group of shadows on the back of her neck and her shoulders and stuff. Because whenever you have really intense lighting, the opposite side is going to have really intense shadow. But I'll do it on this bottle so you can see. So I'll set this to multiply. We need a darker color. Maybe this purple. Yeah, that's good. So the edge of this bottle would be thrown into shadow. And as would the syrup jar here. And then the back of this tray, right? Would have, I mean, and you can see Lydia's inked the shadow really dark on the table. So I'm just trying to match the same kind of like intense lighting that she's going for here. And that already, as soon as you add shadows in, it makes your lights, it makes your non-shadowed parts feel very bright. So it definitely tricks you into thinking, like you almost don't need a ton of highlights if you know how to manipulate shadows, because this already feels like there's a pretty like intense light coming from the right side casting onto it. So real quick, I'll just finish this bottle so you can see kind of how it all comes together. And then that might do it for tonight. I just wanted to stream a little bit just because I haven't streamed for a while. I didn't want people to think I'd forgotten you. I didn't want y'all to think that I had forgotten about streaming, you know? I've just been busy. So I'm going to do some shadow detailing like in the recessed parts of the ketchup bottle. And then we'll do some highlighting on it, and you'll see like eventually every object will have this level of detail applied to it. So that's good. I like the way the shadows already make it feel like it's like in really heavy light. I'll do a quick highlight pass so you can see. The real power of comic coloring is when you start with flats, you go to intense shadows, and then once you do the final pass of highlights, it'll all come together and it'll feel like it's really popping. So we'll just do a highlight down here, just like something really hot. Definitely not going for realism, going for like emotional vibe here. It's pretty cool, man. Looks good. It looks like it's being like really affected by that light. All right. Bye, Ginger Snaps. Thanks for stopping by. Yeah, I should do an all shading stream. I should like get this stuff prepped for, like I should flat an entire page and then just do a whole stream shading it. That'd be really fun. But yeah, I mean, it still needs a long way to go, but you can see how I've got a really limited palette. I think I've only used maybe like 10 colors in this whole panel. 10 if you count that gray tone that the glow fades into on the edges. But you can see how much like you can do with a very limited palette if you've got accurate lighting and you're thinking about, you know, maintaining contrast across every object. Just making like really smart choices about where to put shadows, where to put highlights, making sure you don't layer too much of the same color on top of each other. it makes like a really big difference to try to color with a limited palette. It forces you to make smarter choices, get more clever, and ultimately if you use a more limited palette, your page hangs together really well. It looks like it just automatically infuses it with style. Like, it looks like somebody with some intention behind their work did it. Cool. Well, I just wanted to make a huge dent in this big panel on stream. I'm gonna go watch basketball players who are far more athletic than I am, because they spend their life running around and exercising, and I spend my life sitting here. But yeah, that's all. I know it was a short stream. It was like a couple hours. I need to try to stream more often and longer. But hopefully everybody here kind of got to see the progress from flats to starting to manipulate lighting. Thank you, everybody who asked questions in the chat. It's really, honestly, very rewarding to like come on here and have people ask really smart questions and be able to like have it cue interesting discussions. Join the Discord. I think the link in our bio is broken because Discord links only work for a week. But I'll update it. I'll stop the stream and I'll immediately go like paste a new working Discord link into our bio. So if you want to keep the conversation going about art, like definitely join the Discord. It's really fun. A lot of really cool, nice people in there. It's a good, like, non-toxic space. But yeah, I'll do that right now. Join the Discord. Thank you everybody for tuning in. This is like super fun for me. And I'll in the Discord I'll post the finished version of this when I finish it, so you can see where it ended up, and I can keep answering questions about it in there. Cool. All right. I'm gonna go watch athletic people.